Right, we're ready.
Yeah, we're ready. Welcome to the Engagement Index, where we talk about all things internal and external engagement. So, Lynne, today we're talking about emotion.
I can't help you with that.
I know. I knew they'd gone for the two people that
The least emotional,
yeah. Cold, like unfeeling.
Yeah.
So, my first question, I suppose, to you is it true that you once cried at a brand video? You do cry at brand videos.
Yes. well, I mean, not all of them. A lot of them. A lot of them. I would put this right back to my very first job in brand management was at British Airways.
Yeah.
When Master Brand iconic film video was at its peak.
Yeah.
Do you want me to sing the theme tune?
Yeah. I think that would really help people place
it. Do you remember it?
Not from the song that you're singing, right. But I think I know the one you mean.
The music, the fabulous, iconic kind of...
It was a great video. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah,
it was brilliant. And when that was all about brands having big emotional expression and statements that they wanted to make, and which we see less of now.
Yeah.
But yes, 100% I would cry. Even just a sizzle, like a wrap-up sizzle at a conference, I'd probably cry at that as well. So yes, I do get quite emotional about that.
Yeah. Because I think it's interesting, the Engagement Index found that emotion was the biggest driver for engagement, and the three factors that came out of that: hope, love, and happiness.
Hope, love, and happiness.
Hope, love, and happiness. How do you think brands can harness that? Because I would say a CEO staring down the barrel of a camera to communicate a message to the rest of the business is probably not going to have those three elements in it. What do you think that brands can do?
I think out of hope, love, and happiness, I think from an internal comms perspective, an employee engagement perspective, I think love is a really interesting one. We're going to talk about that, I hope. But I think hope is quite an easy one for a CEO to access in terms of this is about, most CEOs are talking about the future and optimism and bringing people together in the spirit of strategic direction and so on. I don't really think happiness is a natural go-to for a CEO. Do you?
Not really, but that's where I think
I don't
the approach maybe
think about it.
I think that's where maybe the approach in the work you do, where I see it as different, is not using perhaps the CEO to communicate those messages. It's using employees who can access those emotions and bring them across. Is perhaps a way that brands can, if we know that's what the Engagement Index is telling us makes better and drives better engagement.
Yeah,
that's the opportunity for brands to try and.
I don't think I've ever been, as we're talking, I'm thinking, have I ever been in a briefing where someone has said, let's make everyone really happy? Never, ever. And I just don't think it's something you reach for in your conversation around is happiness an outcome of this piece of content, whatever that content may be. But I do think it's quite funny to think of it like that. I'm trying to imagine me saying that out loud. Have you ever said that I
would say from an external perspective, I think it's very much a reflection of the landscape of what's happening out there. And so I think happiness can be interpreted in different ways. It's the sort of what we would call the light to the shade.
Yeah.
So going for the more upbeat and positive story rather than the doom and gloom.
Yeah.
And in a newspaper, you would want to have that balance. You don't want, if you want a news list filled with, bad financial news, bad, foreign news, bad news in the UK, that's a packed agenda. You need to give people a bit more hope. And I think that's what's interesting. What I found from reading the Engagement Index was actually that's where the opportunity is for brands, showcasing the good they're doing is an open door to push out for coverage, things like social impact projects. I was thinking about a campaign we did for BT Group a few years ago where we brought together a care home resident with someone from the BT call centre. They'd been talking to each other for several years, but they'd never met.
Right.
And we brought them together to give him this day out. And I just remember the first content. I mean, it went mad on social because people just really engaged with it because it had all of those elements in it, that happiness, that love, and that hope. The first comment it stuck with me was, I'm not crying, you're crying. I know it's a cliche, but it was the emotion that got to them. That's what brought them into it. That's what engaged them. I think, and that's where I think the difference between views and engagement really come in, because it's about how do you create content that people actually react to and are drawn into and hear the whole thing and listen to the whole thing rather than just clicking on it quick view, move
and
on.
what were you PRing? Was it a broadband router? Oh, joke. That was a joke. That's a happiness. I think there's I feel like in internal comms, we're often going to be facing the agony of making something fun.
Yeah.
And that's where the happy vibes might need to come in.
Yeah.
So we're looking at, forced fun or
you
crafted
love forced fun.
I mean, I do like fun. It's but it's, again, it's a bit like, saying I want a viral video, right? It's kind of, there's either content that's going to make people smile, and we're not touching in going into the realms of being funny, but having fun and making people smile. There is a light and shade conversation to have. But I think on the emotional side as well, there's something about empathy, which is probably one of the most useful emotions.
I completely agree on that.
To work with in your comms briefing process, particularly because we would talk about people having a lived experience and that kind of stuff. Are you really in the shoes of your audience? Do you really know not just who they are, but where they are and what they're doing, how they're living? And I think that applies both to external and internal.
I would totally agree. I think that sort of real life element of stories, and that's where I think like the case studies come in for us in press, right? Finding authentic people to talk about their own lived experience and that relatability. Like I think, and the engagement index talks about that, finding people that, look and sound like me. So when I'm watching that story, I'm not thinking, well, that's got nothing to do with me, because it's, how is that relevant? I think that relatability is massively important. And I think that does build emotion, because it's a natural human thing, isn't it? If I see you laugh, it makes me laugh. If I seeing you're upset, I'm upset. It pulls you. You are drawn together by the mirroring of that emotion. And I think if you can build that into your campaigns and into the case studies, or in your case, the employees that you're using to tell those stories, I think that's what is the driver of that stronger engagement.
I mean, I think all the work that we do at Goldbug, from an employee engagement perspective, it's always going to be brand led. And a brand is built on emotional and rational benefits, right? That's how you build a brand. And we talk about emotional things in the same way we talk about rational things. And I've got a problem with that. Because that means you're not really being emotional. You're just putting it on a page and tick, tick, tick. And it shouldn't feel like a tick box. So
what should it feel like? Because emotions about
it is all about feeling. And I think it is back to that point of, if I don't know what my audience are experiencing every day. And an example I would give would be, we're in London and we are looking at, say, many of our clients are big regional offices. And understanding the difference around someone's day-to-day experience, speaking to 80 customers a day on the phone, or someone speaking to hundreds of customers in a retail store, or somebody thinking about customers in a head office environment. Like, we really need to understand all of those audiences in order to land something that is relevant and also hits the feels in the right way. So I think that's empathy, and it's about a deeper level of empathy, a deeper level of understanding around how people are moving about their day-to-day job. Not everybody, as brand people, we have to have head in the clouds, feet on the ground, I always say, around having the really big ideas, the brilliant creative ideas, really exciting content, really engaging. But how does that actually relate to somebody who's in a very, very different environment? How do you get to the very hard to reach people? And it's you're going to have to use emotion to do that.
100%.
And we saw that in the engagement index, that everything we looked at has an emotional context to it in one way or another.
Because otherwise you're just either talking at people or there's where's the connection? And I think that's even more now with social. Because you're just being bombarded all the time. If you can really grab that emotion, that's going to get someone's attention, but keep it as well, because they want to know the outcome. Like you would, that's a natural human instinct, isn't it?
Where would you, so let's say you're at briefing stage you're doing a response to brief on a PR campaign. Where does the conversation feature around emotion, or does it?
That's a really interesting question. I'd say I think that's a really interesting question, because I don't know how much we do talk about it. I think it's something that we would go to quite instinctively. I wonder if it's from a sort of a news values perspective that that if you can get that emotional angle into a story, then it's going to do better. So I think it's probably something we should talk about more. It's it's just almost a process we go through, similar to what you were saying. It's not
like, don't make it a tick box, make it, really understand the experience people are having in order to kind of jump in their shoes for a bit.
And I was thinking about sort of some of the recent stories, that where emotion has really changed them or pulled them to make them bigger, and how you could think about that in terms of when you were trying to apply this process, applying these principles to make more engaging content. I was thinking about the post office scandal. That had been reported on for years, but in quite an emotionless way. It was on Radio 4. They did a documentary on it 2 or 3, 4 years before. Trade press had covered it. It was when it moved onto TV and they brought those people stories out and the emotion and what that really meant for people. And I think when we talk about emotion, really we have to talk about people, because those are the people. Emotion can't sit on its own. It doesn't exist. It's how people feel. And I think that's a really good example of it, because it talks about the human impact of what had happened to them, and you couldn't help but be moved by that. And I think that's what people were moved by. And then that's what led to the that word of mouth spreading of the program, because that other people wanted to feel that as well. And I think the other thing, we touched on this earlier, but also the landscape of what's going on now. I don't think it's a coincidence that those are the 3 emotions.
I don't either. And I think the version that we would deal with on our side in terms of employee engagement will be the tougher side of the messaging, like reorgs, restructures, that crisis comes. Like, think about, what Marks and Spencer's are going through right now with their website problems. That's going to be having a huge impact internally. So understanding how people are feeling, particularly around change management, there's not a single business that we work with that isn't in some part of that change cycle. We're always people talking to people. I think that's a universal truth that certainly everybody who works in employee comms should always follow, because it's never not that. Ever.
And I think as well, just going back to the landscape piece, I'd be really interested to see if this research happened in like 5 years' time and the political and social landscape was different. Would those 3 elements still be the biggest drivers for engagement? But I think they would, because I think they always are. I think they're universal, whilst I think they're probably hyper exaggerated at the moment and probably more dialed up, because people are looking for hope. When everything else is so relentless, and it's not just the news, is it? It's affecting people day to day. So it used to just be, we'd read the news, but you could put the newspaper down. This is now affecting people's lives, economically, financially, at home. They're not. The world doesn't feel great. So I think that's why I think it's interesting that those are the 3 elements that people are looking for. They're saying that's what will engage me. But I also think that, as I said, they're based on universal truths. They will always be the things that engage people, because they're mirroring themselves, they're seeing themselves in it, and people will always want hope, even when times are really, really good. They're not going to go, show me something really bad.
Right. No, they're not. And also, I think for big corporates, around having that conversation in whether it's your board level, kind of running right through your management structure, around how we don't train people to do this. I can't think of any training that I've ever experienced when I was in-house, where around being a real empathetic leader. It will exist, of course. I mean, empathy is a leadership skill for sure. Think about that. The hardest audiences to reach internally, not to reach, but to influence, will be your middle management level. And it gets called the hard centre for a reason. We're asking more from middle managers around communication skills. How do they really step into this? How would they really move on their skill set around empathy, and how they take messages to their teams, and how they really understand how people are feeling? Because we're told we get a lot of messages at work that we're not allowed to really feel much. And I don't mean something that would result in an HR situation.
Have you ever cried at work?
Do I ever cried at work? Millions of times, but not in front of people. And obviously I was the only senior I was a very senior. I was a senior director. I was the only woman, which is bringing me nicely, a lovely segue into not being emotional at work, right? Because obviously you're not allowed to be emotional at work.
Do you think that's changed?
No, I don't. I think it's I think it is a gender bias for sure, and I think it's still it's unfortunate that a woman who's really passionate about something can be seen as getting too emotional. And there is nothing worse on earth than being told you're being too emotional as a woman. So it's and
luckily that would never happen to me or you.
Never happened to me or you. But has anyone ever said that to you?
What, that I'm being too emotional? Oh God, yeah, 100%. I mean, on a bad way and a good way as well.
Right.
But I think there's different types of emotion, being too emotional.
Yeah.
If it's a situation where it's, there's a problem in your workplace, that's different to how we're bringing it through in work. And I actually think that emotional ability and ability to access those feelings, the empathy you were talking about, is part of what makes your work so great, because does come naturally to you. Like I said, I don't have to spell it out. I don't tend to spell it out, or we are making a very emotional film here,
right? Because
it's built in naturally in the response to how I would respond to the challenge or the problem or the brief, because I'd know that's because I often listen to how I feel as well. I think you would do as well. Like if it moves you, you would think other people would feel that.
Definitely. I also think the feels are way more difficult to measure than the rational things that we would measure about how people feel at work, right?
Yeah.
So it's if we're looking at skills versus emotions, for example, and kind of where does it sit in the measurement piece, it is harder to measure those irrational things. But think about the things that you love about your job will typically be linked to the people you work with, the stuff that you're working on, and that's kind of where it is very emotional, which is a nice link towards love, because it is interesting that came up in the engagement index. And I mean,
and obviously you love me and I love you.
That's right. So that tick good. It's like, but I think it's hard I don't have the answer to this yet, but I love it as what I would call a whiteboard question around where does it fit at work, because you would say it has no place. It's a place of work, it's a place of business, certainly in employee comms. But I've always loved the people I work with, and I've always loved my team, and and it's a huge part of what I do. And I think if you lead through people, and that's your management type, then you're going to be very comfortable with that, but very uncomfortable talking about it. But that's really how it feels. Is that
we don't maybe call it love, but if you're looking at that sort of hope and happiness together, they are a version. Those are elements of love. They are elements of that emotion, aren't they?
I would never tell Jason that I loved him.
Why not?
It would be. Shall I do it? Shall I tell him?
But do you love Jason?
I've worked with Jason. How long have I worked with Jason?
500 years.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we have to exist around each other.
Yeah. That sounds like a long-term marriage.
But it's not. We're not used to this. Is not a subject that usually comes on the table, is it? In terms of, we don't usually use that language. But I do think I think maybe it is something that could be unpacked very differently for a corporate environment. I'm not sure how it fits with press. How does it fit with press?
I think it's same as what I said there. I think it's an element that we wouldn't naturally talk about or verbalise. We wouldn't say, oh, that story's got so much love in it. But, thinking about sort of some of the campaigns that have done really, really well recently, or even stories that have done well, that they have got elements of love in them. Like even disasters, even bad things, you're looking because you understand that someone cares about the people involved. I mean, I was thinking about, and the hope as well. They're elements of love, aren't they? That's what any reaction to something that happened would be a feeling of love, because love can also be about caring about someone and caring about what's happening. I don't think we would call it love.
I don't think we'd call it love either. And it would probably be a serious HR breach.
You wanted to show love in
if you want to show love in the office, it would be quite
that
a
would
challenge.
be, yeah.
And also, I can't stand being hugged at work.
Oh no, you hate it.
I hate it.
You hate it.
And I always have. And when I was in house, I hated the agency hugging me, and now I'm the agency.
Yeah.
I tell the client.
Have you ever been in trouble for trying to show love in the office?
Yeah. Too many times. So that might be a good place to actually bring this one to a close. So what are our three? What are we kind of? So how are we summarising in terms of things we can all do better at using the findings from the engagement index?
So I think the key points are, if you are looking, you're at that stage where you're really looking at ideas and concepts and themes. The report is telling us that if you can bring these themes through, if you can build these into your content, that is going to drive better engagement. Yeah. So it's not with surprise at the end. If you can do that, that is essentially helping you build a formula that will, and not just views. I think this is really important. There's a difference between views and engagement, and we're talking about engagement here, really actually engaging with that content, reacting to it. What do you want people to think, feel and do from watching it? If you can build that hope, that love and that happiness into it. And I don't think it needs to be all three. I think what it's saying is these are the strongest elements. So even if you've just got the hope in there, that's going to help you. So I think for brands, especially talking about, the good they're doing, there's a real window of opportunity, thinking about social impact campaigns, authentic, positive, hopeful storytelling, that you are doing this stuff. Why not talk about it? Yeah. Get that out there. Focus more on that storytelling than not it doesn't have to be one or the other, but the product won't give you that, but the brand storytelling will. And I think a lot of brands are doing this stuff and they're not necessarily showcasing it. I
think for me, I would say internally it's a good thing to have on to actually, this is a good tick list to put onto this subject, which is how are people, making sure that you ask, how are people going to feel about this? Which sounds like a super simple question, but I'm not sure how many people do ask it.
No, I don't think they just they come up with the idea and then not really think about that feeling,
that side of it. Yes. I would also say, don't tell people at work that you love them
ever.
But
I love you.
I love you too. Do you love Sav?
Yeah, I love
you
Sav.
Have to, because you're married to him. So it's finding the right place for it, I feel.
And I think in press as well, sorry, one quick add on there. This isn't just about from that brand perspective, it's flipping it around to the end user, the people, the gatekeeper we're trying to get through. That news list is so packed with negativity. I spoke to a news editor recently who told me, I've got this list called the Joy List. Right. It sits under which I love the name, the Joy List. It sits underneath the news list and it's the upbeat stuff. And I'm always looking for stuff to go on it, like good, authentic storytelling. Yes. There is a shortage of it. There's an opportunity for it. So, it works for your audiences. It works for press. It works internally. Hope.
Let's
love,
do more of
happiness.
Do more.
Yeah.
So I guess on that hugely emotional bombshell love messaging note, we've probably come to the end of this one. Yeah, brilliant. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.